Again, thank you for stopping by the YouTube channel to check out these videos. This is Christian Posta from solo.io. And in this second part video, we're going to take a look at the virtual machine support for running services in VMs and connecting those services and connecting those VMs up to the Istio service mesh so that we can have cross deployment or cross infrastructure communication solved by the service mesh. And this has been a long time ask from the Istio community and those that run Istio. And we're starting to see in Istio 1.6 and now 1.7, which I'm running here, that the support is improving and getting a lot better. So in the previous video, part 1, we looked at connecting the VM to the service mesh and being able to call from the VM, which we're on here, into a service that's running in the service mesh, and the communication paths all work. Now, what we want to do is check that if we run a service on this particular VM, that we can call it from the service mesh. So let's take a look at that. First thing we're going to do is run an HTTP server here. Simple Python little HTTP server. It's going to serve a very simple response if we happen to call it. So let's, what is the command here? Let's get the IP of that particular machine and then do, I think it's that. All right, we see a very simple response when we call that. Now to call this from the service mesh, we need to make this service, and specifically this VM, available to the mesh. Right? And so in Istio 1.6, there was the introduction of the workload entry resource. And this workload entry resource gives a way to describe the VM, and to the rest of the service mesh treats it as a first-class citizen in the service mesh. So that's what we're going to do here. We're going to first of all take a look at the workload entry. We're going to script this so that we're pointing to the VM IP address. But before we do that, we're going to create a Kubernetes service. Now we're going to do it as a service just to show that you can attach workload entries directly to a Kubernetes service, so that inside of Kubernetes, inside of the service mesh, the services, the workloads in the mesh running in Kubernetes, they think they're just talking to a Kubernetes service, and that could be backed by pods, but that could also be backed by VMs. Alternatively, we could create this as a service entry, which in the Istio terms is really a cluster that lives outside of the mesh. But we're able to do either one. So let's take a look at doing this as a service. So we'll create the Cloud VM service, right? And just to kind of give you an idea of what's happening under the covers, if we come to the sleep pod, let's do a port forward. Here, let's go to Firefox. And if we go host, 15 clusters. If we do a search for, what is it, Cloud VM, we see our Cloud VM cluster is in here because we created the Kubernetes service. But it doesn't show any IPs. It doesn't show any hosts in the EDS entry. So for that, what we need to do is create the workload entry. So let's create the workload entry in VM services. Let's look at it in YAML. And we see that it is, we assign the IP address. We give it some labels so that it'll match either a service entry or a Kubernetes service. And now if we come back to here and refresh, we should see that in the EDS, and we do. All right, so we have our cluster, so we should be able to route to this from within the service mesh, right? So we ran our So we're running our little Python service here. From here, we saw that we can call it from outside of the mesh. This is just my local map. Now let's see if we can call it from within the sleep pod. So from within the service mesh, if we say curl, let's also do -v just to be safe if something goes wrong. I think it's cloud VM dot VM services. It's the namespace where this workload entry lives and where the service lives on port 9090. Let's see. We call it and it works, right? So you might be saying, well, you called it from your own machine and it worked. So why would it be any different from the service mesh? Well, in this case, we are using the names known by the service mesh, and in fact, this case known by Kubernetes. But what happens if we change the mutual TLS policy to be strict, right? Right now, everything is either plain, I think it's permissive. Let's find strict, right? We're going to apply this policy, this peer authentication policy, to strict, which means now everything will be using mutual TLS. So if I try to call this from my desktop, it shouldn't work because I'm connecting with a plain text client to a service on the VM that has the Istio sidecar proxy there. And the Istio sidecar proxy is going to assume and expect mutual TLS. So if I try to call it, that won't work, right? But then from the service mesh, since we're originating from the mesh and we're, the client here is expecting mutual TLS as well, the call should complete without a problem. And we see that it does. And so this is establishing end-to-end from the service running in Kubernetes to the VM, which the mesh has now been expanded to support. So I think this capability in Istio, and as it evolves, as it improves, and as it matures, is incredibly powerful, because the service mesh is only as useful and valuable as there are the number of services in the mesh, right? And so there's probably in your organization going to be a lot more services that run outside of a Kubernetes environment than those that do run inside the Kubernetes environment. And if that's not the case, if it's vice versa, then you don't have to worry about this. But for those folks that have a large investment in the services running in VMs, extending Istio or extending the service mesh to be able to support that is incredibly, incredibly powerful. So that's Istio on 1.7, so 1.7 docs. Like I said in the previous video, it's coming, it's almost there. Refresh a couple of times, it's almost there. But the workload entries, as well as some of the new capabilities around bootstrapping the identity for the VM coming in Istio 1.7, these are all very welcomed. So thank you to the community for helping to go down this direction, and for the maintainers and help prioritize and get this work done. It's starting to look really good, so I definitely recommend going to check out Istio, and especially Istio 1.7, and trying out this this capability. Now, in the scripts for this demo, I always get questions about that. I think that's an Istio demo. Are here, VM demo. So all of the things that I used and showed here, definitely go, feel free to check it out. Check out the documentation once it comes out. And then lastly, if you want to reach out to me, I'm Christian Posta again on Twitter. Reach out and I'll be happy to answer any questions, or go to the Istio community Slack, or to slack.solo.io, where I hang out a lot, and where at Solo we work on these open source service mesh technologies, and we provide commercial support for Istio. We provide product tooling to help simplify adopting a service mesh like Istio, to adopting things like API gateways and so forth. So definitely come check us out there. Again, thanks for stopping by the YouTube channel and look forward to the next videos. Thanks.